Folks, welcome back to Indaba Africa. This is Chris once again. Hello, folks, and welcome back to Chris Wyatt Reports here on the Indaba Africa channel. It's the Indaba Conversation with Chris at a special time on a special day with a special guest. So that works out really well. So, folks, let me make sure I don't butcher this because, you know, I always get confused with my German, my Afrikaans, and people always say, but you speak Afrikaans. And my first response is, ik praat niet Afrikaans nie, eh? So let's go with that. Let me welcome onto our program today, Reiner Duvenage. I got to be careful because that's one of my favorite rugby names, and I haven't talked to many South Africans with that surname. Reiner, hoe gaan dit?
Baie goed, dankie, en met jou, Chris?
Oh, it's going very well for me as well. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, listen, folks, this is Reiner from AfriForum, and we've talked to Jacques many times in the past, as well as Ernst van Zyl, the Conscious Caracal, and even on occasion Ernst Roots and others from the organization. And now, if I'm not mistaken, Reiner, let me get this. I don't think a lot of people realize this, but if I'm wrong, correct me. But well, she's not Kruger anymore. Now she's Renee van der Vyver. Renee, I think, works for AfriForum now. Is that correct?
That's true, yes. So she's part of our team. It's now Jacques Broodryk, it's Ernst van Zyl, it's me, and then Renee as well. So yeah, we're growing, and I also started in the beginning of the year. So yeah, we're growing, but it's exciting.
I forgot to put the record on this. My apologies because we got chatting. Wait, let me hit the record so we've got the backup.
Recording in progress.
All right, sorry about that, folks. That was my error. That happens sometimes early in the day. So it's early morning here on the East Coast of the United States. It is early afternoon there in South Africa. So, Reiner, what I want to talk to you about today is a couple things happening. Of course, the Minister for Health in South Africa, Joe Phaahla, extended the period for people to comment about this lockdown. Well, I call it the permanent lockdown, but the amendment to the Health Act, and a number of civil rights groups and organizations are involved in trying to elicit comments about this. And also there's been court cases. I know AfriForum has been involved in some court cases. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that this morning. But by last check, Dear SA, which Rob Hutchinson's organization is collecting comments, they were approaching 300,000 comments on that site alone. I know there's a couple other sites. And also, I've got a link to AfriForum in the video below. People can take a look at that. It takes you to the page that discusses the health amendment. What exactly is AfriForum's position on this, and what has it been doing, or have you been doing things, collecting signatures or comments from the public for this, or are you just sitting back for a court case? What exactly is AfriForum doing in response to this public response period, I guess you call it?
Yeah, so let's just give your viewers a little bit of background. So the government ended the state of disaster on the 5th of April, but before that it published very far-reaching new health regulations. And according to these health regulations, almost all of the measures are then going to be, are written permanently into law. So they're permanently enacted into the National Health Act. And even when ending the state of disaster, the government also temporarily extended basically all the measures that were in place for another 30 days. And then until the new National Health Act comes into force in the beginning of May. So, of course, we are very much opposed to this government abuse of power. It's definitely an abuse of power because it's permanently enacting supposedly temporary COVID-19 measures into legislation. And that's a very, very serious abuse of power. And what this does is it gives the Minister of Health, due to this, is that the COVID management, it all comes into it all falls under the responsibilities of the Minister of Health. And it gives him him or her, if in the future, the authority to just implement these measures at a moment's notice. So without even having to enact a state of disaster, which was in place for 750 days in South Africa. So it gives the Minister of Health the authority to just enact these measures. And some of these measures are even, just actually fall back on measures that were actually struck down in court. So the example of this is forced quarantine, which is written into the new draft regulations, but it was actually struck down in court over here in South Africa. So this is a serious abuse of power. So we're very, very much against this, and we prepared extensive commentary, 39-page commentary on legal commentary, which we submitted, and we also on our website we received 30,000 comments, so people supporting our cause, and a lot of other civil society organizations and a lot of individuals are also outraged by this by these new regulations. And I know the government received hundreds of thousands of comments on the new regulation. So it's a very, very serious matter here in South Africa. But we as civil society and a lot of individuals are really taking a stand against this.
Well, one of the things I noticed, and I waited for independent verification of this, and actually got it from Dear SA, Rob Hutchison himself and others, is that I saw people pass around social media screenshots from Outlook in which they had sent over Outlook messages to the government to register their concerns, pro or anti. Most of it's against what the government's doing. And the South African government just delete without read, delete without read, delete without read, delete without having been read. I don't think they're that bright. These bureaucrats don't realize that they've created a trail or evidence trail, an evidentiary trail that could be used in a court case against them. I think this is mounting evidence that the government clearly isn't going to listen. I remember when the lockdown started in March of 2020 in South Africa, rather draconian lockdown, which led to the Minister of Police crowing and chuckling about criminalizing nearly 300,000 law-abiding South Africans for stepping on the lawn or not wearing a mask in their yard or nursing a child on the beach. It was crazy. Excuse me. But when Beckett Chile was excited about criminalizing law-abiding citizens, this thing going on, that lockdown, when it started, there was, of course, this public comment period about one of the restrictions, which was no tobacco sales. And of course, the Minister for Uncooperative Governance and Irrational Affairs, that's Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, the least popular person in Addis Ababa when I worked at the African Union when she was there. She was like a hermit. Nobody wanted to see her. But she put this period out there for public comment, and they claimed that they decided to continue this lockdown with no tobacco sales based on no evidence. They did it because the public was against letting people buy tobacco. Of course, they had 100,000 plus comments that were saying, don't put a ban on this, and like 2,200 comments in favor of it. It seems to me just to be a window dressing period. Does AfriForum or does anyone there have any concerns that this is just a pro forma going through the motion as if that they're simply using this so they can say they've taken all the steps and they're going to go ahead and go forward anyway? And if so, two-part question, if so, do you think there's sufficient information now from responses from the public that a court case could be taken if this government does that to overturn the decision in future?
Yeah, well, I mean, I cannot really comment on the government's intentions or like if there are any sinister intentions. But the thing is, the way that this legislation works is that we cannot prevent this via an interdict. So the thing is, we have to wait until these new regulations come into force, which would be in May. And then we very much, I mean, our commentary also forms the basis for our legal case. And our legal case will definitely then, as soon as these regulations come into force, and if the government ignores our commentary, which I mean, there's a strong possibility. There's a strong possibility that this will happen. Of course, we hope that the government will just realize the error in its ways, and that it will actually see that the people really, really are against this abuse of power. But in the case the government ignores the commentary, then then we're ready to take legal action, and we're willing to take this case to the highest possible court. And it won't be just AfriForum. There will be a lot of civil society organizations taking a stand against this. And I sincerely think we also have the public support in this matter. I've been seeing on Twitter, and I've been seeing in my comment sections, but also my colleagues, Adams van Sale. People are just really fed up with the government and not willing to that's not willing to relinquish temporary powers given to it under the Disaster Management Act. And I think people are really calling out the government, and it's good to see people uniting against this abuse of power.
Well, to be fair, it's a fair response on your part. You can't speak to the intent of the government, and it wouldn't be fair to ask you that. That's not really where I was going, but you did answer the question. Man, there's a precedent here. As I mentioned, now, to be fair, I'm not being entirely objective in this conversation, and that should be quite obvious to my viewers, but they know my position on this, and this is not an objective conversation. It's objective for you to answer it as someone representing AfriForum, but from my perspective, they know how I feel about Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma and how I feel about the National Coronavirus Command Council and its Sangoma-based rolling the bones decisions when it comes to science. But anyway, we'll leave it there. But on that point, but no, it's there is a precedent for this. They did ignore comments during the tobacco ban. They were overwhelmingly in favor of people, probably mostly people who have, nicotine addiction, who smoke, who probably wanted their smokes, who said, don't do it. We don't want the ban. And a handful of comments saying, end it. Or put it in place. So there's a precedent for them ignoring things in the past, and this is a much bigger gamble. I mean, this would give them permanent ability to do all sorts of things. Now, Reiner, unless I've missed this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but having read what's gone through there, and this is something I report on because when Ramaphosa talked about extending the lockdown for 30 days and the things that they were going to put into these permanent amendments to the Health Act, he skipped over a lot of what they want to do, including health officials at a port of entry, like say OR Tambo, when you arrive in the country, they could pull you aside and say, we suspect that you've been exposed to an aerial pathogen, and you're going to have to be quarantined for 2 weeks at your expense. That's in there. They could do that for influenza. They could do it for anything like that. Did I miss something, or is that what's actually in the proposed health amendment regulations?
Yeah, the thing is, in the regulations they mention notifiable medical conditions, but they don't provide a list of those conditions, and nothing stopping the government from, arbitrarily changing that list of conditions. So obviously it's aimed at COVID-19, but this does leave, and some people have argued that this does leave the door open for the government to, really abuse its power with regard to a lot of diseases. So it's a troubling thing, and it's definitely, that's one of our legal arguments. It's ultra vires, so it's outside of what the scope of the legislation. The legislation, the National Health Act, was never intended to have such far-reaching consequences. So that is a very troubling aspect of the new health regulations, certainly. And also, I mean, our government is completely following it's taking the wrong direction. All over the world, we're seeing countries opening up more, imposing less restrictions, and we're actually taking the route of permanently enacting these regulations and giving the government the power to implement these COVID-19 measures at a moment's notice, and that's a very, very dangerous thing.
Well, what I have to say about it is it seems to me that it's quite capricious. It doesn't seem to be based on anything rational. It just seems to be a power grab by the government. And listen, I'm not going to just pick on South Africa and the African National Congress, and we can take the Tories, and we can take the Liberals, and we can take the Democrats and Republicans, the SPD, the CDU in Germany. Take your pick. Political parties in power always seem to find ways to entrench themselves into power into perpetuity in whatever way they can, either by changing constitutions or changing laws. And that seems to be what's been going on here. I mean, in South Africa, I think a lot of people not familiar with South Africa don't realize that early in its existence after the 27 April 1994 elections, it began ruling South Africa. The ANC amalgamated metropolitan areas. Now, what did that do? Well, for my listening audience, what happened is that instead of having hundreds of municipalities around South Africa, many of them with radically different ethnic composition. You might have a community in the Northern Cape that's mostly Khoi, and you might have a community in the Western Cape that's mostly colored, or a community along the Garden Route that's mostly white Afrikaans-speaking Afrikaners. And now what you get is these huge metropolitan areas where all these smaller communities are incorporated. And instead of people getting experience in government from opposition who would have got elected in a smaller populated area, now they're part of a big amalgamation, and all those councils disappear, and only the big party, which swamps these other folks, gets experience in government. So that's one way that the ANC has ensured that it stayed in power, by keeping people out of government, by amalgamating and putting all these big cities together. And it's not just that. That happens all over. So I think it's quite concerning when governments reach for this sort of power. And my trust level after 2 years of this nonsense is completely gone. It was not very high to begin with governments, but it's very much gone. It's certainly the case of South Africa. It's I'm going to go a little bit longer here. Indulge me a little bit longer. It is my question, but people talk about expropriation without compensation. I have warned South Africans from the very beginning when this was first proposed by the African National Congress, after they rejected, there's always somebody in the party bringing it up every year. It got rejected, voted down, and suddenly, because they were losing popularity a few years ago, it was the flavor of the day, and they've been pushing for it. But it's not simply about taking land from people and righting past wrongs. That's not it at all. There's been a period for that. This is about giving the state power to just destroy you. If you oppose the government in the future, the government of the day, and expropriation without compensation was the law of the land, they could come for your stocks, your bonds, your jewelry, your buckies, your house, your apartment, your land, anything. And if you say something against the government of the day, that's a very, very chilling message to destroy democracy and freedom of speech. Because if you say something, they'll just take it away. And it's legal. Look, apartheid was legal. taking and separating people. Past laws were legal. It was immoral, but it was legal. So my point, that's a long soliloquy there, but my point is that this is a very concerning situation, and my trust level for the government of South Africa, regardless of who's in charge, is virtually non-existent. I suspect that a lot of South Africans are very much of the same opinion that I am. Are these the sort of responses you're seeing, or is it wildly different?
Well, definitely. And the thing is, in South Africa, we are a failed state. The government cannot guarantee the basic necessities. It cannot guarantee safety. We see around 20,000 murders per year. We see around 40,000 cases of rape per year. Those figures are astronomical, and some of the highest in the world per capita. And we're seeing regular blackouts. It's become normal in South Africa that people are without electricity for prolonged periods of time, and this is called load shedding. But actually, it's just the government implementing blackouts because it cannot really provide for the country's service needs. So it's a failed state, and a lot of this has been caused by the centralization and the homogenization, but also like the anglicization is also a product of that. Forcing communities to become something they're not, or forcing communities to follow the government's centralized ideas. And it's been a destructive force in South Africa. And it's very terrible because people are suffering as a result of the government's failure. And I think it's, at least now, the government is failing to such an extent that we're seeing that it's a completely failed state. And it's becoming apparent, and therefore it's clear that these new health regulations also basically it's a desperate attempt from the government to cling onto the unbridled power afforded to it under the state of the Disaster Management Act. So definitely you touched on some very important points there.
Well, it is interesting. You say failed state for a long time. In fact, a few years ago, when I was still active service with the Army, they have this Great Decisions lecture series, which the Ivy League schools here in America do, and I think actually they do it in the UK as well, Oxford, places like that. But they take a topic, a geopolitical topic, and a noted lecturer speaks on it, and this happens around the country. Well, the Army War College does it as well, and I was asked to speak about a topic that's essentially picked by this board that selects these topics every year, and they called it South Africa's Fragile Democracy. And that was in 2018, about a year before I retired from active service, and I gave that lecture. And I talked about South Africa's democracy. Now, this is right after Ramaphosa had ascended to the head of the ANC and took over and then became president of South Africa. And I talked about all the challenges in South Africa, but I was hesitant to publicly call South Africa a failed state. But for months now, I have been saying exactly that. I mean, how else can you describe a country that willfully ignores an armed insurrection and mass looting and chaos and rioting in its midst as a consequence of internal struggles inside its own political party, and leads to billions of dollars in damages, lost business opportunity, over 350 lives, massive failure, police not prepared, police not coordinated, no resources. The Army finally sent in days later without rations. They had to go stand in the queue to get rations with people who are trying to get, it's total disaster. Now, compound that with what's going on now in KwaZulu-Natal. We see that these floods began with the heavy rains a week ago Sunday. It wasn't until Wednesday that the national government even recognized that anything was going on in KwaZulu-Natal. By then, hundreds of people were already dead, and they were unaware, they've been washed out to sea, that sort of thing, or buried under rubble. And there's no response. There's no functional helicopters. The only helicopters flying and doing search and rescue for days were private organizations and businesses out there trying to rescue people. There's no water bowsers in place. There's no water tankers. There's no concerns about cholera or dysentery. No movement of abolition units to help people. No temporary shelters. No government response at the national, the provincial, or the local level. And in fact, what we see on Twitter is Zandile Gumeda, an accused fraudster and former mayor of Durban, Itequini, out surveying the damage. But we're being assured by the minister of KwaZulu-Natal, Sile Zikalala, that there'll be no fraud. We've learned our lessons from the Rona pandemic. There'll be no fraud or maladministration of these resources that people are donating. It's quite frightening when you talk about failed state. I think those two events show a microcosm of either an inability or an unwillingness to respond to the basic needs of South African citizens. I mean, what's unfolding in KwaZulu-Natal, Ramaphosa spoke last night, this is what we're going to do. Yeah, 8 days later, buddy. 8 days later, it's a bit late to get started.
Yeah, it's very troubling and it's very sad what's happening in KwaZulu-Natal. And we know there's a 1 billion rand relief fund, but there's already. I mean, the funds haven't been available for very long, but there are already a lot of reports that some of these funds are being looted. So, and we know that the COVID-19 pandemic fund was about 152.5 billion rand. About half of that was looted as well. So it's extremely, it's shocking and it's disturbing that people would steal money from those that need it the most. And those are the people that govern this country. And it's a very, very troubling situation. And of course, people are suffering as a result of it. You can throw these figures around, but at the end of the day, it's people that lost their homes that are sitting on the street corner, and the government and people are looting these funds intended for them. So it's just another symptom of being a failed state. And we just have to hope that we can get this government voted out in the next election and try to move forward as a country. But at the moment we're in a very, very troubling situation. And the government is it knows that people are losing trust in it, and that's why it's desperately trying to cling on to power with pushing things like expropriation without compensation, or nationalizing the health industry, or in fact these new health regulations. So it's quite clear that the government is very, very much unwilling to relinquish its power.
Well, Reiner, I'm going to give you a chance to answer some more questions here, and I'll talk a little bit less as we go forward. But I did want to cover one more thing, and what is heartwarming about South Africans in general, whether they're Zulu, Xhosa, Afrikaner, Portuguese, German speakers, English speakers, Venda, Tswana, doesn't matter. But what's generally about South Africans is that they can be very generous people when it's necessary. And we've seen amazing outpouring of support by private citizens to help those in KwaZulu-Natal in this crisis. Gift of the Givers was on the scene almost immediately, already rendering aid, helping people out, and civil rights organizations are also trying to raise attention to the issue. I have to say that about South Africans. It's they're kind of like Americans in that respect. It's one of the parallels between our societies, is that when the chips are down, people can show up and be where they're needed in the absence of a useless government.
Yeah, well, definitely. And I think our country is being held together by communities helping each other, by the private sector. So when you hear these statistics, 40,000 rapes per year, cases of rape, 20,000 murders, people ask themselves, like, how does the country even still exist? And the answer is just people standing together from a bottom-up sort of approach, and from a community-based approach, and standing together, helping each other, and that's the only thing in the private sector that's keeping the country together. And that's the way it is. And I think it's encouraging to know that the people aren't bad. The people can work together. The communities can coexist. We just need to get rid of this terrible government that is abusing its power, and that is basically insulting the citizens. We recently had a case where the government wanted to donate 50 million rand to Cuba.
Yes.
Where, in fact, I don't know, you might have covered that, but in fact, South Africa is higher on the global hunger index than Cuba. So, hunger and food insecurity is a bigger problem in this country than it is in Cuba. But still, the government wanted to donate these much needed funds to Cuba. And we actually had to prevent the government from doing so by obtaining an interdict in court. And the government still wants to go ahead with this 50 million rand absolutely outrageous and insulting donation. I mean, it's an absolute insult. You don't care about your citizens at all, and it's plain to see if you're willing to donate funds when people are dying of hunger in your own country. It's shocking and disturbing.
Well, in fact, yesterday, Cyril Ramaphosa announced that they were going to go ahead and do it anyway, even though there's interdiction there, because they're going to give in-kind aid rather than the money. Anything they can do to simply circumvent the will of the people seems to be the attempt by the African National Congress. So I'm not sure what comes from this. I mean, we saw that big parts of the lockdown measures implemented by the National Coronavirus Command Council were declared unconstitutional by the North Gauteng High Court in June of 2020. Yet they still implement these things. There's been no consequences for this government. It's quite shocking. But, you talk about the donation to Cuba. We saw reports a couple weeks ago of 15 toddlers and infants starving to death in Nelson Mandela Bay in the Eastern Cape. as a consequence of the provincial social department not distributing 67 million rand of food aid to needy people. Now, I'm a small government person, but when the money's there and it's meant for an intended purpose, it ought to be used for that. They turned the money back to the national government because they didn't spend it, and 15 children starved. And there are reports of mass acute malnutrition throughout the Eastern Cape and Port Elizabeth in particular, Nelson Mandela Bay. This is unconscionable that this would be happening. And also, if you look to Northwest, I don't have any figures on hunger and malnutrition, but I can tell you that the 57 billion rand that the government gave to the provincial legislature, 17 billion has been turned back. They haven't spent it, but there are potholes in Rustenburg and Zeerust and everywhere. Mafeking, you go, well, anywhere you go up there, it's a mess. This is unconscionable that this government would let children starve. Of course, this is the Eastern Cape where they let children in primary school fall to their death in pit latrines, suffocating on feces. I'm gobsmacked at just how incompetent and callous these people are.
No, I think you pretty much summarized it well there. There's so many horrifying cases that get reported in the media, and I think it's important for the rest of the world to take notice of the type of government we have in South Africa. It's really, really one of the worst governments in the world. And it's terrible for the people that actually just want to see progress and actually want to have a future for their children, their grandchildren, and want to see this country be successful. But we're being held back by this government, and it's a tragedy, And it's again, just you can throw these statistics around, but it's real people being affected, real people suffering as a result of the government's failure.
Well, what's interesting is that those who follow South Africa and are familiar with AfriForum will know that it's often mischaracterized by people who oppose it and claim that it exists for one reason. And the conversation we're having, it sounds like you're concerned about South Africans. I haven't heard you say Afrikaner once. I haven't heard you say white people or colored people. You've talked about South Africans, and I believe that's the purpose of AfriForum. I know that it has a focus, a cultural focus, for also helping the Afrikaner, the Afrikaans and Afrikaner community. But it also sounds like AfriForum has an interest for all South Africans.
Yeah, 100% true there, Chris. Yeah, and the thing is, we, of course, like any NGO, we have our target group, which is the Afrikaans people, and we're very glad. And most of our members are also Afrikaners, and we know that the Afrikaans language and culture has come under threat. But a lot of other cultures and communities have also come under threat due to the government's policy of Anglicization and centralization. And by promoting, the interests of Afrikaners, but also taking on other cases that are, more aimed at other communities. And through our work as well, a lot of times when we are repairing potholes and taking over the government's service delivery responsibilities, we are benefiting everyone in South Africa. And it's also explicitly stated in our goals. We believe in bridging and bonding, so we want to build bridges and bonds between different communities. We are an absolutely inclusive organization. We want to live together with other communities. But the thing is, we also want our own community and our own language, our own culture to be respected. That is it's a very simple thing to ask. And it's and of course, if you start from that basis, you also respect other communities and their rights, to have their own cultures and their own languages. And that's the simple and the best way to actually move forward as a country, by promoting those by those ideas.
Well, Reiner, let me ask this question. This is from the audience here, and this is from Arctic, who's actually a pilot in South Africa. So not a lot of those these days because you couldn't fly for a long time. But Arctic asked a question, and I think it's a very germane question. It's relevant for the moment. We should ask you this. AfriForum and others had this court date to challenge the state of disaster, and then this thing was lifted. They were challenging it in its entirety. But didn't go back to court when it was lifted. Will AfriForum or others? Well, I don't know if you probably can't speak for others unless you're in a combined lawsuit with them. But will you go back to court now that a new state of disaster has started? Because I guess last night he announced a national state of disaster for what happened in KwaZulu-Natal, which makes me shake my head. It shouldn't be a state of disaster, but that should be a disaster area. But anyway, the particulars of South Africa's state of disaster are beyond me, other than the fact that it's immoral to continue it into perpetuity. I think unconstitutional. But will AfriForum and others go back and challenge this? And did it stop in its entirety when they lifted it, or what's there? Because there's a lot of confusion about what the court case and what was going on with it. Well,
I just have to also explain to the viewers. I think it's important to note that the government really wasn't intending to end the state of disaster, and it was due to our court date approaching and other people's court dates approaching. And the government knew that it had no grounds, legal grounds, to continue with the state of disaster, and it actually had to actually end the state of disaster, and that's what it did now. And but before doing so, it actually slyly attempted to implement these measures permanently this time into legislation, and that's why people are so outraged. In terms of the new state of disaster, we do not, at the moment, we're not opposed per se to this new state of disaster. I mean, there is some real tragedy taking place, so there are, theoretical grounds for the state of disaster to be implemented, and we won't really challenge this new state of disaster based on the KZN floods. We won't really challenge that in court. The reason we won't is because if it remains temporary and it's ended by the government in due course, that's the intention of the whole state of disaster. But let's say if the state of disaster based on KZN continues for a couple of months, then beyond the period for which it was intended, then we can start thinking about taking action against it. In terms of the new legislation, like I mentioned earlier, we cannot take action against these new health regulations, which are actually much more far-reaching than the temporary extension of the measures which happened after the state of disaster was ended. Because I mean that extension is only 30 days. So what we'll take on the new health regulations, which is actually the permanent extension of COVID-19 measures. And unfortunately, the nature of this legislation is such that we cannot challenge it. We cannot prevent it by an interdict. So we have to wait until the new regulations come into force, and then we can take legal action against these regulations. Unfortunately, that's the only legal route we can take in this instance. But I can assure the viewers that we will definitely take this matter to the highest court, and as soon as these regulations come into force, we'll challenge them, and we'll take legal action against them.
Well, neither one of us are attorneys. At least I'm not aware that you're an attorney. So this may be an unfair question, but I think it's certainly a lay question. What about the ambiguity of the State of Disaster Act? Somebody, I think, ought to challenge that to ensure that a more clear definition of how long people can get away with this should be in there. I mean, they've been extending this. They did it for 25 months. We entered a third year of lockdown, and no evidentiary basis or reason or rhyme was put to it by the government. I think that there ought to be more clarity in the act, and someone ought to challenge it. Now, you would think that an opposition party or someone in parliament would propose this, but I don't know if it's possible to challenge this on constitutional basis in the courts. Is that something at AfriForum or anyone that you're aware of is taking a look at? Because I think that's a place where people ought to really take a close look, because as we see now, the government could declare, and not the KZN floods, but let's, another, monkeypox or something breaks out, then they can just declare a state of disaster and do this all over again. South Africa lost 1 out of every 8 jobs is gone, completely evaporated in the last 2 years. Not coming back. The tourism industry, the hospitality industry, eviscerated, destroyed. Tens of thousands of restaurants completely gone, never coming back. It's going to take decades to recover where South Africa was economically over this. Do you think that someone is going to challenge this, or is it a challengeable thing?
The thing is, as you mentioned, I'm not a legal.
We're not lawyers. We're not lawyers.
Anything that I say would just be speculation. But I think it's important that we do have sort of a protocol, and we have rules when a state of disaster is implemented. So there has to be, expert input, and at least it's something that the government has to, cannot just do at a moment's notice. It has to announce a state of disaster. But that is the nature of a state of disaster. And like you mentioned, then it's within the government's powers to decide when and for what a state of disaster should be implemented. So definitely, but I cannot really comment on that. And I know that we don't really have anything planned in that regard. But you'd hope that a responsible government wouldn't abuse its powers to implement a state of disaster when it isn't necessary. And we saw that with this COVID, and this is definitely something I can comment on, the COVID with the COVID-19 measures and the state of disaster. There was no longer any legal grounds for the state of disaster, and that's why the state rushed to end the state of disaster. But then, didn't want to relinquish the powers, and that's why the powers were now the COVID-19 measures were now written into legislation permanently into the National Health Act. You always have to be you have to be alert, and you have to really keep the government in check. And I think that's where civil society plays a key role. Civil society plays a key role in preventing these abuses of power. And even if let's say if this new state of disaster is implemented for too long, then we'll also take a stand against that. So it's that's the role of civil society. And this is something, but I mean, this is something around the world. In most countries that have this legislation for state of disaster, a lot of countries probably wouldn't dare to actually keep these the state of disaster in place longer than necessary. So that's a very, very technical element of the whole situation.
Well, by donkey, you're very, very diplomatic and very kind to take a stab at it. Like I said, neither one of us are attorneys here, so I did kind of put you on the spot with that one. But let's shift gears very, very quickly and talk about something very interesting development at AfriForum. And for years we've heard people characterize things in the press, mostly the press making these claims about farm murders, about calling it genocide. It's mostly the press I've heard say that, and then they blame other people for characterizing it that way. But one thing that's certainly clear in my mind is that this government has definitely had a campaign of cultural genocide against the Afrikaans language and Afrikaner heritage. That would be my characterization. You don't have to share that characterization, but I would say that. Now, the reason I make that point is I'm asking this question. AfriForum has launched just a few days ago, AfriForum TV. For those who don't know that, it's out there. Actually, I've registered, went there, and I've watched a couple programs. If you're a netball fan or a rugby fan at the varsity level, it's a great place to go watch those things, among other things. But also a very interesting cartoon there, the little hero there, Jan van Riebeck cartoon. I watched that the other day. So they've launched AfriForum TV. What's this about? I mean, why is it there? Is this an effort to share programming with the Afrikaans-speaking community, which, by the way, for those outside South Africa, most of the people who speak Afrikaans as a first language are people of color, in case you didn't know that. The colored community of South Africa is the largest group of people who speak the language. But what's AfriForum TV all about, and how did it come about? Can you tell us a little bit about that, Reiner?
Yes, it's sort of a fact that that we have been at times misrepresented in sort of the establishment media, the traditional media. We have to also say, and these days we're seeing it more often, that we do get fair media coverage as well from traditional media. So I don't want to just say that all the traditional media is bad, but what we are noticing is that there's a very much a need and a demand for a more community-based entertainment and service. Also, I've spoken about the legacy media and the traditional media in South Africa, where there's a bit of a problem, but also right around the world in the entertainment industry, Hollywood, Netflix, and stuff like that. And that's something that a lot of people don't really agree with some of the agendas being pushed in Hollywood and in Netflix, but also locally in South Africa. And that's why, people just want to have an entertainment platform similar to Netflix. The way it works is it's also streaming, and you have all the sort of features that you typically find on Netflix. But it's community based. A lot of it is Afrikaans language content, but with English subtitles. There will probably be one or two English shows as well. And it will just be normal, standard entertainment that people can enjoy, that don't necessarily promote any political agenda, just simply there to entertain people without trying to push anything. So I think that's a very, very nice and very, very, very good step that we've taken at AfriForum. And we're very excited about AfriForum TV. I think it's going to be a massive success. And we've really got our first sort of in-house comedy that's planned, and it's about the Dutch East India Company sailors on a boat, and it's going to be quite humorous, I think. So I think the fresh perspective we're going to bring to the marketplace is going to be very exciting for viewers. And we're very excited.
So what prompted this? I mean, was this some decision taken internally, or was it, you mentioned a need for it, a hunger for it? I know that there's some other services out there that have been trying to get going, online broadcasting, Afrikaans primarily. I was asked to be a news commenter on one of those networks, which hasn't gotten off the ground yet, so I'm still waiting for it. But is a demand signal? It sounds like there might have been a demand signal there, people looking for programming, and would this be a fair characterization? Part of the platform is to have, for lack of a better term, it's a very generic term, wholesome programming, that sort of thing. Is that what the channel's about, or is it just everything Afrikaans? I mean, where is it going?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a demand for this. We've seen this. We've heard from our members. We have 300,000 members, so we really know what's going on. On the ground level. But so we know there's a demand for this. What it is, again, it's not just going to be wholesome. We'll have some edgy comedies, but it won't be. We won't be pushing a narrative. There won't be any. Anything pushed on the audience. The audience, we'll make our content honestly. You'll write something. It will be funny, but we won't have a predetermined narrative when determining the content. So we're also going to be open for people from outside to use our platform to make content for us. So it's very much it's not the wholesome thing is it's not that important, but there will be shows that have that element. We're pretty much catering for a lot of different Afrikaans people, and I think it's just something that was necessary in this time.
Now, do you have your own in-house studio and film production? Are you going to do that, or are we going to see licensed content? I mean, am I going to be able to tune in and watch old clips of Jan Spies on there, doing some of his comedy, or will we see Egoli or Steven Delan show up on there? I mean, is it going to be licensed content and homegrown content, a mix of things, or because I mean the licensing for those things and residuals can be a little pricey, so I'm not sure. Do you know what direction that they plan to go?
Yeah, I think it will be a mixture. It will be some, we'll definitely try and get some old licenses for old Afrikaans shows, but then we'll also produce our own in-house content. So that's, our own shows. We do have a dedicated film studio. It's called Forum Films. It's now, the name is changing to AfriForum TV. So we do have our own production capabilities, and we can do a lot of things. I mean, Aaron Stritz does his show, which will also be on AfriForum TV, and Aaron Van Sale, Conscious Carico, also does a show. And we really have very, very talented people working for us in our film department. And so we can do a lot on our own, but then we also hope that people from outside will also bring some content to the table, and that we can grow in that way, in a very organic and a natural way, making our own stuff, buying things from other producers outside of AfriForum, and also hopefully, getting some old content as well. So it's a very exciting platform.
Now, here's the important consideration for folks. By the way, the link to AfriForum TV and AfriForum, if you want to go there, plus the campaign to respond to the health amendment, is below the video right there. You can find AfriForum, and also one of the moderators, Hendo, has just put the link for AfriForum TV in there once again. So I came back from Africa a few years ago, was assigned to the Army War College, and they picked up my favorite television show, Longmire. And when Netflix picked up Longmire, I said, I'm going to subscribe to Netflix as long as they have that show. I'd never been a Netflix subscriber. So I signed up for Netflix. It was $7.99 a month for the top level, for the best quality, high definition. And now it's $22 a month, just a couple years later. Yeah, wow is right. My income hasn't increased by 300%. It's actually gone down because I retired from active service now. But here's the key thing. I noticed I went to check out AfriForum TV and sign up for it. And while, I do understand Afrikaans, maybe I missed something, but I saw the word gratis. I look, from Latin on there, and I didn't get charged, and I'm watching content. At least for the moment, it appears to be a free platform. Did I miss something, or did I slip in under the wire? What happened there?
No, you're right. So it's a free platform. It's for our members, but also for a lot of other people. So yeah, it's a great platform. And I'd urge everyone to I think you probably need to use a VPN over there in the States to get access to it. Or I don't think we have United States.
No, I didn't need a VPN. I went straight in. That's really? What I'm saying. Yeah, so maybe I shouldn't have said anything. Shh.
Yeah, I don't know, because usually the way that these things work is that like DSTV, which is our main sort of streaming, but also satellite TV provider, you can't watch DSTV content in other countries. So I don't know. This is a bit of a surprise to me, but I'd have to ask the IT people to explain this to me. But it's cool. I mean, it'd be great if people could watch it in the States and all over the world.
Well, I think it's an important consideration. That's why I went to test it, if nothing else. I'm not a member of AfriForum. I never joined. I follow the organization. I get the emails all the time, just that way I can be independent, report on it objectively. I can't see, anyway. So I checked out the channel, and the reason I think it's important is that there's a huge South African expat community, especially Afrikaans speakers in Australasia, in Australia, New Zealand, UK, US, France, Japan, lots of folks all over the world, and I'm sure a lot of them would be interested if they can get access to it. So I was able to get in, and hopefully my letting the cat out of the bag here doesn't result in IP address blocking or something like that. But so you can let the folks know that I was able to sign up successfully. I had to wait a little bit for my confirmation email, but it came. I signed up. I went and I watched these things. It was pretty interesting. I did need a virtual private network. I just did it straight from my IP address, which was pretty interesting. So, that's what I said. Wow, that's pretty cool. But okay, so it's free, so people can go check it out. I mean, and if you don't speak Afrikaans and you want to learn a little bit about Afrikaans, everything I've seen right now is Afrikaans program. I haven't seen any English stuff yet. Oh, by the way, I don't know, who do I have to talk to? Who do I talk to get myself a program on that network? I throw that out there. Happy to report on the news or do a interview program on that network if they're interested. I will be working with another network here sometime soon, but I'm available anyway. But so it's free, and we're going to wrap up here in just a few moments, folks, because I'm going to get going. And Reiner's been very generous with his time this morning. On short notice, he agreed to come on yesterday. So, Reiner, this question I want to ask: you've had this in-house. You mentioned the name of it, this film production organization, and I'm surmising that's because of the documentaries that AfriForum has been producing over the years, and particularly ones about farm murders and things like that. And those are very professional, Hollywood studio quality things. And that must be what you're talking about, that in-house film capability being turned into production for this station.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what we're going for. We're going for high quality, like almost Hollywood, well, definitely Hollywood sort of content. The Hollywood quality sort of content. And it's you mentioned the diaspora is a big thing. And we're hoping that we can then reach a lot of the Afrikaners living overseas. We just saw that there were some recent very scary statistics released, I think on Sunday, where almost a million people left South Africa between 2015 and 2020. And the great majority of those people went to very developed countries like Australia, the States, Great Britain, New Zealand. And I mean, you can't get into those countries if you're not a skilled person. And I think it's fair to assume that a lot of those people would have been Afrikaners as well. We do have significant amounts of South African people living in other countries, and I think they also have this longing to view content in their native language, but also high quality content which can sort of keep them in touch with South Africa. And that's also, I think, a goal of AfriForum is to also act as a bridge between South Africans living overseas and this country. To maybe in the future also. Be sort of a platform that people can use to maybe return to South Africa when things get better over here. And I think it's a very important role that we can play in the future. So that's why we're also involved internationally. And I think AfriForum TV is an excellent step in that direction.
Well, I agree 100%. I think it's a great idea. For people who immigrate or emigrate from South Africa and immigrate elsewhere, and it's not just South Africans, it's people all over the world. People don't realize that even in the modern age with mass communication, instantaneous, here's WhatsApp, I can call my family here, we can video, we can FaceTime, we can do all that stuff, email, international air links. After a generation, and certainly after 2 generations, people tend to lose their cultural ties in many large measures, and the first to go is language. And that's why I think something like this is particularly important. If you're an Afrikaner and you move to New Zealand, your grandchildren may be ethnically Afrikaners, but they're not going to be Afrikaners, they're going to be Kiwis. Unless you somehow, now that's not saying people shouldn't assimilate in society. We have the Amish and Mennonites who came to America 350 years ago. And their first language is still, many of them is still German today. It's 17th century German, which you and I can understand, but we have to listen very closely to, because we know modern standard written German, but Hochdeutsch, but they retain their cultural distinctiveness, and they're participating members of society. They follow our laws, they pay taxes, they contribute to our economy. They're Americans, but they've retained their cultural distinctiveness. And Afrikaners who went to Latin America after the Boer War lost that within a generation or two. Their descendants don't speak Afrikaans. They have no ties other than their Dutch and French surnames, that sort of thing, and maybe their faith. And that's kind of sad, especially for a small community like Afrikaners. This, I think, AfriForum TV, if it's successful, should provide a platform for folks to stay in touch with their cultural roots and their linguistic roots.
Of course, 100%, and that's a way of preserving our culture, preserving our heritage. Even if people are overseas, they can keep in contact with their culture, and it's a very, very important thing. And I think it's going to be awesome for people to have that to fall back on, and it's also a way of not just preserving our culture, but also expanding on our culture, bringing new content, bring out new content, and it's a very, 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 very cool platform that we created. And I think a lot of people, this is a final point I'd like to make, is a lot of people also living outside of South Africa, they immigrate, and then they usually do it for safety and for economic security. But a lot of them also experience cultural angst. They get this feeling that they cannot really, they cannot remake the Afrikaans culture in a different country. You cannot relive that in a different country. And this makes it much easier for people to have contact with their culture and with their own roots. And maybe in the future, it can also, over the generations, people can have closer contact with Afrikaans, because, like you mentioned, outside of South Africa, there's very little opportunity or possibility for the Afrikaans culture and language to exist beyond one or two generations. So I think that's why we're doing so much in South Africa, to preserve our culture, preserve our heritage, and to just really just make sure that our children and grandchildren also have a future growing up and speaking Afrikaans and in the Afrikaans culture.
Well, absolutely. And here's the thing: you can live overseas, but a barbecue is not a braai. Beef jerky is not biltong, and bunny chow is not what you feed to the rabbits in the hutch outside. just share that. Anyway, Reiner Duvenage, it's been a pleasure having you on this morning, our first conversation. You've been very generous with your time. We went longer than we anticipated. Thank you so much for your generosity and for sharing your thoughts, and also for definitely stepping aside the legal landmines that I tossed out there in front of you to get a response. I do appreciate that. Thank you so much. You're welcome back on the program anytime. And let me get on my phone to Kali and to Ernst right now to get myself programming on AfriForum TV. I'm just working on that right now. Hang on a second. Anyway, but seriously, thank you so much. Any final comment before we let you go, maybe about the health regulations, where people can respond, and what it's all about, and we'll go from there, and we'll wrap up from there.
Yeah, so people can make their voices heard by submitting their commentary on our website, afriforum.co.za, and then we have an action against the health regulations, basically permanently enacting supposedly temporary state of disaster measures into law, and the people can then add their commentary there and help us to prevent this abuse of power. And thank you for having me on, Chris. I really enjoyed it.
No, you're most welcome. It's been my pleasure. Now, I always get it wrong in Afrikaans because I'm always using a combination of Afrikaans and French, and I say met plaisir because that's not how you say pleasure in Afrikaans. It's French. But anyway, so thank you so much, Reiner. It's a pleasure. I'll put you in the waiting room. You can drop off, and I'll send you a note afterwards. Thank you so much, and we'll get you on here sometime again in the future. I do appreciate your time, and have a lovely day.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you.
All right, folks, I'm going to put him in the waiting room so he can drop off there. I think someone just came in and said, hey, your time is up. He's got to go. All right, let me put him there. All right, thanks a lot for tuning in, folks. This special time for this program today. This interview with Reiner Duvenage from AfriForum. First time we've had him on the program, answering questions about the Health Act and your chance to respond to it, as well as AfriForum TV, a new development. If you're not aware of it, go sign up for it. Check it out. I mean, even if you don't speak Afrikaans, it's interesting. Check it out. You can see sporting events there. As I mentioned, netball, which is a very strange sport for those of us outside the Southern Hemisphere, netball. And you can also see some varsity level rugby on there as well, which is kind of interesting. Thanks a lot, folks. Appreciate it. You have a lovely day. I have a video coming out about the mask mandate ending here in the States, and I'll get that loaded up as soon as I can. I have to take a look and see if it's safe for YouTube. It might just be the other platforms, but I'll let you know. Thank you all so much, and I do appreciate your support. Be sure to smash the like button, and we'll catch you here later today during my lunch hour on Chris Wyatt Africa, Chris Wyatt Reports. Cheers.